The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Coyote Creek, Montana, in the summer of 1878, marking the end of one life and the beginning of a desperate struggle for another. Nora Calloway flinched at the sound, clutching her two small children close to her chest as the town doctor solemnly pulled the sheet over her husband's face. The smallpox that had ravaged the mining town had finally claimed Thomas Calloway, leaving his 30-year-old widow and their children, 5-year-old Samuel and 3-year-old Elizabeth, alone in a world that showed little mercy to those without protection. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Calloway," the doctor said, his voice heavy with exhaustion after weeks of fighting the epidemic. "We've done all we could." Nora nodded numbly, her pale face streaked with tears that had long since dried. The funeral was a simple affair, as most were in Coyote Creek: a wooden box, a few words from the preacher, and a plot in the ever-expanding cemetery on the edge of town. She stood there, straight-backed and hollow-eyed, as the last shovelful of dirt fell on her husband's grave. "Mama, I'm hungry," Samuel whispered, tugging at her black mourning dress. "Hush now," she replied softly, squeezing his small hand. "We'll be home soon." But home was no longer the safe haven it had once been. With Thomas gone, so too was their source of income. The small savings they had accumulated during his time at the silver mine would barely last a month. Nora knew how to sew, could keep a garden, and had even taught at a small school back east before marrying Thomas and heading west. But none of these skills would feed her children tomorrow. The next morning, Nora rose before dawn, her determination set like flint. She dressed in her simplest clothes, braided her auburn hair, and roused the children. "We're going to visit Mr. Garrison at the general store," she told them as she helped Elizabeth with her shoes. "You both need to be on your best behavior." The bell above the door jingled as they entered the store. Frederick Garrison, a portly man with small, calculating eyes, looked up from his ledger. "Mrs. Calloway," he said with the false sympathy of a man who had seen too many widows in his store. "My condolences on your loss." "Thank you, Mr. Garrison," Nora replied. "I've come to ask if you might have any work for me. I can keep books, organize inventory, whatever you need." Garrison's eyes traveled over her face, down to her children, and back again. "I'm afraid not, Mrs. Calloway. Business is slow with the mine reducing operations. Perhaps you should consider returning east to your family." "We have no family left east," she answered, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. "Thomas was all we had." "Well, that's unfortunate," Garrison replied, turning back to his ledger. "I'll let you know if something comes up." But Nora knew his words were empty. The town was struggling, and a widow with 2 young children was a burden few businesses were willing to take on. The week that followed was a blur of similar rejections. The boarding house had no need for a maid, the saloon wouldn't consider hiring a respectable woman, and the school already had a teacher. Their food supplies dwindled, and Nora began skipping meals to ensure her children had enough to eat. By the 10th day after Thomas's death, Nora stood in her small kitchen, staring at the empty cupboards. There was nothing left but a handful of flour and a few dried beans. Samuel and Elizabeth sat quietly at the table, their eyes following her every move. "Mama, when are we going to eat?" Elizabeth asked, her small voice breaking the silence. Nora knelt beside her daughter, smoothing back her blonde curls. "Soon, my love. Mama's going to find us something." With a desperate plan forming in her mind, Nora put on her bonnet and took her children by the hand. They walked to the edge of town, where the stagecoach stopped, and travelers often camped before continuing their journeys. If she could find someone passing through, someone who didn't know her situation, perhaps she could sell some of Thomas's belongings, or offer to wash clothes or cook a meal in exchange for food. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they approached the small camp area. A single covered wagon stood there, and nearby, a man was tending to a campfire. Beside the wagon stood 2 horses, one a sturdy chestnut-pulling horse, the other a magnificent black stallion with a white blaze down its face. As they drew closer, Nora could see the man more clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His dark hair fell just below his collar, and a well-worn cowboy hat sat atop his head. When he turned at the sound of their approach, Nora was struck by eyes the color of a summer storm. "Evening, madam," he said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep and carried the slight drawl of Texas. "Good evening," Nora replied, suddenly unsure of her plan. I wondered if you might need any help with your camp. I can cook or mend clothing for a fair price." The man studied her for a moment, his gaze taking in her worn dress, the two tired children clutching her hands, and the desperate look in her eyes. "Name's Yates Jameson," he said finally. "Just passing through on my way to Oregon. Don't need much help with the camp, but I'd be grateful for some company at dinner. Been on the trail alone for weeks." Before Nora could respond, Samuel's stomach growled loudly in the silence. The boy looked down, embarrassed, as Elizabeth began to sniffle. "Mama," she whispered, "I'm so hungry it hurts." Tears welled in Nora's eyes as she looked up at the stranger. All her pride, all her careful plans dissolved in that moment. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please feed my children. I'll work for it, whatever you need. They haven't eaten properly in days." Yates Jameson's expression softened as he knelt down to eye level with the children. "What's your name, partner?" he asked Samuel. "Samuel Calloway, sir," the boy replied, straightening his shoulders despite his hunger. "And this is my sister, Elizabeth." "Well, Samuel and Elizabeth Calloway," Yates said with a gentle smile, "how would you like to help me make the best stew west of the Mississippi?" The children's eyes widened, and Elizabeth's tears stopped instantly. Yates stood and looked at Nora, his eyes serious. "We'll eat together," he said firmly. "All of us, and tomorrow we'll figure things out." "You don't understand," Nora began, but Yates cut her off with a shake of his head. "Mrs. Calloway, please call me Nora." "Nora," he amended, "I understand more than you might think. Now, let's get these young'uns fed." As the sun set over the Montana mountains, the small group gathered around Yates's campfire. True to his word, he had prepared a hearty stew with chunks of rabbit, potatoes, and carrots. The children ate ravenously, and even Nora, despite her initial reluctance, found herself accepting a second helping. "This is the best stew I've ever tasted," Samuel declared, his face smeared with broth. Yates chuckled. "High praise indeed. Though I suspect anything would taste good after being hungry for so long." When the meal was finished and the children were dozing by the fire, Nora finally shared her story with Yates. She told him about Thomas's death, the dwindling supplies, and the town's inability or unwillingness to help. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted, staring into the flames. "I can't feed them, can't keep a roof over their heads for much longer. The mine owner wants the company house back by the end of the month." Yates was silent for a long moment. "I've got a small ranch in Oregon," he said finally. "Nothing fancy, but it's good land, fertile. I've been east selling some horses and buying supplies, heading back now." Nora looked at him, confused by this seeming non sequitur. "That sounds nice." "What I'm saying is," Yates continued, his voice gruff with an emotion Nora couldn't quite place, "I could use some help on the place. It's just me and an old ranch hand named Hank. Too much work for two men, especially with winter coming. Are you offering me a job?" Nora asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm offering you and your children a place to stay, food to eat, and yes, work if you want it," Yates clarified. "My mother taught school before she passed, left all her books behind. Those young'uns could learn, and you could help with the cooking, the garden, whatever suits you." Nora stared at him, searching for any sign of deceit or ulterior motive, but found only honest concern in his storm-gray eyes. "Why would you do this for strangers?" she whispered. Yates poked at the fire, sending sparks dancing into the night sky. "Because 10 years ago I was that hungry child," he said quietly, "and no one stopped to help." The next morning dawned clear and bright. Nora had spent a restless night weighing Yates's offer against her dwindling options in Coyote Creek. By the time the first rays of sun crept over the horizon, she had made her decision. "We'll come with you," she told Yates as he handed her a cup of strong coffee. "If you're certain about your offer." "I am," he replied simply. "We can stop by your place, gather whatever you want to bring. The wagon has plenty of space." Within hours, Nora had packed their few belongings: clothes, a family Bible, Thomas's pocket watch, and a small wooden horse he had carved for Samuel. She left the key to the company house with the mine foreman, who seemed relieved she was leaving without protest. As they loaded the last bundle into Yates's wagon, Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house hurried over, a basket in her arms. "Heard you were leaving, Nora," she said, slightly out of breath. "Thought you might need some food for the journey." She handed over the basket, which contained bread, cheese, and a jar of preserves. "Thank you, Martha," Nora replied, touched by this unexpected kindness. "This is very generous." "Well," Martha said, glancing at Yates, who was helping the children onto the wagon seat, "you take care of yourself and those little ones. Oregon's a long way." It was indeed a long journey. The stagecoach route would have been faster, but Yates explained that traveling by wagon allowed them to carry more supplies and go at their own pace. They followed the old emigrant trail, crossing rivers and mountain passes, camping each night under the vast sky. Yates proved to be a patient traveling companion. He taught Samuel how to build a proper campfire, showed Elizabeth how to identify edible berries, and regaled them with stories of his adventures as a young cowboy. To Nora's surprise, he was well-read, often quoting Shakespeare or Emerson as they sat around the evening fire. "How does a cowboy come to know so much poetry?" she asked one night after the children had fallen asleep. Yates smiled, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "My mother was determined I'd have an education, even out here. We had 3 books in our cabin: the Bible, Shakespeare's complete works, and Emerson's essays. I read them all until the pages wore thin." As the days turned into weeks, Nora found herself watching Yates with increasing interest. The way his strong hands gently guided Samuel's smaller ones as they fished in a stream, the deep rumble of his laugh when Elizabeth presented him with a crown of wildflowers, the quiet competence with which he handled every challenge the trail presented. For his part, Yates seemed equally drawn to Nora. He noticed how she never complained, despite the hardships of the journey, how she maintained a quiet dignity even when washing clothes in a cold stream, how she read to her children each night, bringing stories to life with different voices and animated expressions. They were crossing into eastern Oregon when disaster struck. A sudden summer storm unleashed a torrent of rain, turning the trail into a muddy quagmire. As Yates urged the horses through a particularly treacherous stretch, the wagon wheel caught in a deep rut. The wagon lurched sideways, and before anyone could react, it tipped onto its side, sending supplies scattering across the muddy ground. "Samuel, Elizabeth!" Nora cried, scrambling from where she'd been thrown. "We're okay, Mama," Samuel called. He and his sister had landed in a patch of soft mud, shaken but unharmed. Yates had already leapt from his horse and was checking the overturned wagon. "The axle's broken," he announced grimly. "We'll need to make camp and see what can be salvaged." They managed to erect a makeshift shelter using the wagon canvas, but the rain continued relentlessly through the night. By morning, they were all cold, wet, and miserable. Elizabeth developed a worrying cough, and even Samuel's usual cheerfulness had dimmed. "There's a settlement about 10 miles west," Yates said as he studied his well-worn map. "If I ride ahead, I might be able to bring back help. What if you don't find anyone?" Nora asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice as she cradled Elizabeth against her chest. Yates met her eyes steadily. "I'll find someone," he promised. "But I need you to be brave while I'm gone. Can you do that?" Nora nodded, though her heart hammered in her chest. "We'll be fine. Just come back." With a last long look at the 3 of them huddled under the canvas, Yates mounted his black stallion and rode west into the driving rain. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Nora told stories, sang songs, and played guessing games to distract the children from their hunger and discomfort. But as the day wore on with no sign of Yates, her own anxiety grew. "Is Mr. Yates coming back, Mama?" Elizabeth asked, her voice raspy from coughing. "Of course he is, sweetheart," Nora assured her, though doubt gnawed at her insides. "He promised, didn't he?" It was nearly dusk when they heard the sound of approaching horses. Nora cautiously peered out from their shelter, her heart leaping at the sight of Yates leading a small party of men with a wagon. "Told you I'd be back," he said as he helped them from their shelter. His clothes were soaked through, and exhaustion lined his face, but his eyes were warm with relief at finding them safe. The newcomers introduced themselves as farmers from a nearby settlement. They helped load the salvaged supplies into their wagon and insisted on taking the weary travelers to their community. "My wife will have hot food waiting," said one man, a friendly fellow named Henry Cooper. "And we've got medicine for the little one's cough." The settlement of Pine Valley proved to be a collection of sturdy cabins and small farms nestled in a picturesque valley. The Coopers welcomed them into their home, where Mrs. Cooper fussed over Elizabeth's cough and insisted they all change into dry clothes while she prepared a hearty meal. Later that evening, as the children slept soundly in a borrowed bed, Nora found Yates sitting alone on the Coopers' porch, staring at the stars that had finally emerged from behind the clouds. "Thank you," she said softly, sitting beside him, "for not leaving us." Yates turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I would never leave you, Nora. Not you, not those children. I hope you know that by now." There was something in his voice, something in the intensity of his gaze that made Nora's breath catch. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her hand over his. "I do know," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "Why?" he asked, turning his hand to entwine his fingers with hers. "Because I've already lost one man I cared for," she admitted. "I'm not sure I could bear to lose another." Yates brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen," he said. "Life out here doesn't allow for such promises. But I can promise that as long as I have breath in my body, I will do everything in my power to keep you and those children safe and fed and happy." Tears welled in Nora's eyes as the wall she had built around her heart since Thomas's death began to crumble. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Yates Jameson," she confessed, "and I never expected that to happen again. I think I fell in love with you the moment you stood before me, swallowing your pride to beg for your children's sake," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Nora Calloway." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, both were smiling despite the tears that shimmered in their eyes. The next morning brought new challenges. The wagon would need extensive repairs, which would take at least a week. Elizabeth's cough, though improving with Mrs. Cooper's herbal remedies, still caused concern, and they were still over 100 miles from Yates's ranch. "The stagecoach comes through in 3 days," Henry Cooper informed them over breakfast. "It could take you as far as Silver Springs. From there, it's only a day's ride to your place, Yates." "What about our supplies?" Nora asked. "And your horse?" "Hank can come for Thunder once I send word we've arrived safely," Yates replied, "and we can replace what we need in Silver Springs." So it was decided. They would take the stagecoach to Silver Springs, then hire horses for the final leg of their journey. The 3 days of waiting passed quickly, as the friendly community welcomed them with open arms. Elizabeth's cough improved dramatically under Mrs. Cooper's care, and Samuel found a group of boys his age to play with. On the morning of their departure, the entire settlement gathered to see them off. Mrs. Cooper pressed a package of food into Nora's hands while Henry clapped Yates on the shoulder. "You've got yourself a fine family there, Jameson," he said. Yates glanced at Nora and the children, his expression softening. "Yes," he agreed. "I believe I do." The stagecoach journey was cramped and dusty, but mercifully uneventful. They arrived in Silver Springs as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the bustling town. Unlike Coyote Creek, Silver Springs showed all the signs of prosperity: well-maintained buildings, busy streets, and a general air of optimism. "We'll stay at the hotel tonight," Yates decided, helping them down from the coach. "Get a fresh start in the morning." The Silver Springs Hotel was the finest establishment Nora had seen since leaving the East. The rooms were clean, the beds comfortable, and the dining room served food that made the children's eyes widen with delight. "Is your ranch near here?" Nora asked as they enjoyed their meal. Yates nodded. "About 20 miles northwest. It's not as fancy as all this," he warned, gesturing around the elegant dining room. "It's a working ranch, plain but solid." "As long as there's a roof and food, it will be paradise to us," Nora assured him. The next morning, Yates hired horses from the local livery stable, a gentle mare for Nora, and a sturdy pony for Samuel and Elizabeth to share. The final leg of their journey took them through rolling hills covered with tall grass that swayed in the summer breeze. "There it is," Yates said finally, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley ahead. "Stormhaven Ranch." As they drew closer, Nora could make out a sturdy log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, a corral with horses, and fields where cattle grazed. Smoke rose from the chimney, and an older man emerged from the barn as they approached. "That's Hank," Yates explained. "Been with me since I bought this place 5 years ago." Hank proved to be a gruff but kind-hearted man in his 60s with a weathered face and calloused hands. He greeted Yates warmly, then turned curious eyes on Nora and the children. "So you finally found yourself a family boss," he said with a nod of approval. "About time." Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable. A large central room served as both kitchen and living area, with a massive stone fireplace along one wall. A corridor led to several bedrooms, and a ladder provided access to a loft space under the eaves. "It's not much," Yates said, suddenly seeming nervous as Nora explored the space. "But there's room for everyone. The children could have the loft. Kids always seem to like sleeping up high, and you could take the bedroom at the end of the hall. It gets the morning sun." "Where will you sleep?" Samuel asked innocently. A flush crept up Yates's neck. "I've got a room on the other side," he explained hastily. "Next to Hank's." Nora couldn't help but smile at his discomfort. Despite the long journey together, despite the kisses they had shared, Yates was determined to be a gentleman. "It's perfect," she told him, touching his arm gently. All of it. The first few weeks at Stormhaven were a period of adjustment for everyone. Nora learned the rhythms of ranch life: the early mornings, the constant chores, the satisfaction of work completed. The children thrived in the open spaces, growing stronger and happier each day. Samuel trailed after Yates like a shadow, soaking up every bit of ranch knowledge he could, while Elizabeth revealed a surprising talent for gardening, spending hours with Hank tending the vegetable patch. For his part, Yates watched with growing joy as his once empty home filled with laughter and life. Each evening, they gathered around the table for meals, sharing stories of their day. Afterward, Nora would read to the children while Yates sat nearby, ostensibly reviewing his accounts, but more often watching the three of them with a look of wonder on his face. One evening in late September, after the children had gone to bed, Yates found Nora sitting on the porch swing, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the autumn chill. "May I join you?" he asked, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. Nora nodded, making room for him on the swing. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds: the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the pines, the occasional hoot of an owl. "Are you happy here, Nora?" Yates asked finally, his eyes searching her face in the moonlight. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," she replied honestly. "You've given us so much, Yates: a home, security, purpose. You've given me more," he countered. "Before you came, this was just a place where I worked and slept. Now it's a home. You and those children, you've brought it to life." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, savoring the solid warmth of him. "I love you," she said simply. "I think I have since that first night by your campfire when you promised we would eat together." Yates's arm tightened around her. "I said we would eat together always," he reminded her, "and I meant it." He shifted slightly, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." In his palm lay a simple gold band with a small, sparkling diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they decided to head west together. He said it was a promise that whatever adventures life brought, they would face them together." Nora's heart thundered in her chest as Yates slid from the swing and knelt before her. "Nora Calloway, I love you more than I ever thought possible. I love your strength, your kindness, your unwavering devotion to your children. I love the way you've made this place a home. Will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Samuel and Elizabeth? Will you build a life with me here at Stormhaven?" Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." Yates slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. Their kiss was deep and tender, a seal on the promise they had made to each other. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Springs. Samuel proudly walked his mother down the aisle, while Elizabeth scattered wildflower petals before them. Hank stood as Yates's best man, his usually stern face softened with emotion. The Coopers made the journey from Pine Valley to witness the union, bringing with them a quilt Mrs. Cooper had made as a wedding gift. The ranch house was transformed for the celebration that followed. Lanterns hung from the porch rafters, tables groaned with food contributed by neighbors from miles around, and a fiddle player kept everyone dancing well into the night. As the last guests departed and the children finally succumbed to exhaustion, Yates led his bride to their bedroom, his room, now expanded and refurnished for the two of them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Jameson," he said softly, closing the door behind them. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets, Nora traced the lines of Yates's face with gentle fingers. "I never thought I would find this again," she confessed. "Love, family, belonging." Yates caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "When you first stood before me, asking me to feed your children, I saw a woman with extraordinary courage. I knew then that I wanted to be the man who made sure you and those children never went hungry again. And we never will," Nora said with certainty. "We'll eat together always, just as you promised." The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Jameson family. The ranch prospered under Yates's careful management, allowing them to build additions to the house as the family grew. A year after their wedding, Nora gave birth to a son they named James, after Yates's father. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Hope, named for the feeling that had brought them all together. Samuel grew into a confident young man with his stepfather's love of the land and his mother's quiet determination. By 18, he was effectively co-managing the ranch with Yates. Elizabeth blossomed into a beautiful young woman with a talent for healing, eventually training with the doctor in Silver Springs. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates surprised Nora with a special gift, a family portrait painted by an artist from Portland. The painting showed all of them gathered on the porch of the ranch house. Yates and Nora in the center, surrounded by their 4 children and old Hank, who had become like a grandfather to them all. "It's perfect," Nora whispered, tears of happiness in her eyes as she studied the portrait. "Our family." That evening, as they sat on the same porch swing where Yates had proposed a decade earlier, they watched their children playing in the yard, their laughter floating on the summer breeze. "Remember what I told you that first night?" Yates asked, his arm around Nora's shoulders. "When you asked me to feed your children," Nora nodded, leaning into his embrace. "You said we would eat together always." "And we have," he said with satisfaction. "Not just food, but life, all its joys and sorrows, its challenges and triumphs. We've shared it all together." "Always," Nora agreed, reaching up to kiss the man who had saved her family and her heart so many years ago. "Just as you promised."